They auctioned the obese girl like cattle. Mountain man bid highest. Alone together. They're auctioning the fat girl after the horses. The shout rolled through the dusty main street of Silver Peak long before Elara Whitfield stepped onto the block. By the time the clock in front of the bank struck 2, the crowd was already primed for cruelty, half drunk on cheap whiskey, half drunk on the thrill of watching someone lose everything. She heard them before she saw them. Laughter, boots on boards, the sharp crack of the auctioneer's hammer as another piece of her father's ruined ranch was sold off. 200 acres of prime bottomland gone, someone called. Wonder what's next? His soul? No, she thought dully, just his daughter. Elara, get out here, girl! Her father's bark cut through the hot September air. Marcus Whitfield stood on the wooden platform, red-faced and sweating, vest straining over his paunch. He'd lost the land at cards, lost the cattle in a bad winter, and now he was losing what little remained of his dignity. But he still had enough pride to drag her down with him. Elara stepped out from behind the rough boards at the side of the platform, rope biting into her wrists where he'd tied her. The boards were hot beneath her thin-soled shoes. Dust clung to her ankles. She kept her eyes fixed on the far hills, refusing to look at the faces staring up at her. Lord, someone whistled low. She's bigger than the hay wagon. The laughter hit harder than a slap. Elara felt heat scorch up her neck. She knew what they saw. A woman of 31 with a body that had never learned how to disappear. Thick arms, heavy breasts, a soft, rounded belly beneath a faded gray dress that pulled too tight at the seams. Strong legs that had carried water, hauled sacks of grain, chased stubborn calves back to pasture. All they cared about was that she took up space. Marcus seized a fistful of her upper arm and shoved her to the center of the block. "This here's my daughter," he announced, voice oily with false cheer. "Elara Whitfield. Eats like a horse, works like 2. She can cook, clean, tend stock, and she ain't afraid of hard labor. I'm starting the bidding at $50 to cover what she owes me in board and failed work." Failed work. As if she hadn't broken her back trying to save the ranch he gambled away. "50 for the cow," a man near the front called. "Do I get the trough with her?" The crowd roared. Elara squeezed her eyes shut for half a heartbeat. If she let the tears fall, they'd smell blood. Somewhere beyond the line of wagons and horses, Colorado's mountains loomed blue and vast against the sky. She had always loved them. Today they felt like a wall she would never reach. "Come on now," Marcus urged, lifting his hands. $50 for a strong pair of arms and a broad back. Who'll start? No one answered. Men grinned, nudged each other, whispered. A few looked thoughtful in a way that made Elara's skin crawl, calculating how many chores a woman like her could do, how many beds she might be forced to warm. If you're listening to this right now, from a tiny room in a city, from a farm miles from town, from another country entirely, tell me in the comments where you are, because today, in this dusty Colorado street, there is nowhere Elara can run. 30 then, Marcus snapped. I'll start at 30. 10, someone jeered. She'll eat the rest. More laughter. Elara's vision blurred. Her wrists ached. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst right there on the splintered boards. And then a voice cut through the noise, low, rough, and carrying like distant thunder rolling over stone. 300! The entire crowd turned. At the edge of the platform, one man stood a head taller than the rest, broad-shouldered, coat dark against the pale dust, black hair streaked with gray at the temples, beard trimmed close over a scarred jaw. His eyes were a cold, unblinking gray, watching her as if he saw something no one else bothered to look for. Ezra Wolf Blackstone, the richest, most dangerous mountain man in 3 counties, bidding on the girl they just compared to cattle. The name moved through the crowd like a shiver. Ezra Blackstone, Wolf, the man who trained the fastest horses in 3 states, the recluse who lived 40 miles beyond the last marked trail, the widower whose rage had once wiped out an entire band of outlaws after they destroyed his family. Men stepped back without realizing they had moved. Women went silent. Even Ilara's father straightened his vest, face twitching with sudden unease. Ezra ignored all of them. His gaze held only her. Ilara felt that gaze like a hand closing gently but firmly around her heartbeat. She had never been looked at like that, not with hunger, not with pity, not with ownership, with assessment, with something fierce and unsettling, like he was trying to decide if she was worth stepping into trouble for. Marcus found his tongue first. "Well now," he said loudly, wiping sweat from his brow. 300 from Mr. Blackstone. Do I hear 350? "You hear nothing," a man muttered. "Ain't nobody bidding against Wolf." Ezra didn't even blink. He simply lifted one hand, a gesture that wasn't a threat, but carried the weight of one. Silence fell deeper. Marcus swallowed. 300 it is, then. Going once? 350, Ezra said. Calm, cold, final. It wasn't a bid. It was a warning. Marcus's eyes gleamed with greed. 350. Do I hear? One more thing, Ezra interrupted. He stepped forward onto the lower step of the platform, close enough for the boards to creak under his weight. The whole square seemed to lean toward him. "When I pay," he said, voice level, "you sign her over legally as an employee, not property, not chattel, not collateral." Marcus blinked. "What?" Ezra's gaze sharpened. "You heard me. She works for me. She earns wages. She can leave when she chooses. I don't buy people." "But she owes me." "You owe the bank more than she ever owed you," Ezra said, "and this keeps you out of jail another month. Do you want the money or not?" Marcus's jaw flexed. He wanted it, desperately. Ilara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Legal, free, wages. No man had ever bargained for her freedom before. Marcus huffed. "Fine, fine. Employee contract. Whatever gets me the cash." He lifted his hammer again. 350 once, twice. "Ilara," Ezra said quietly. His gaze locked on hers. Her breath froze. "Do you understand what's happening?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You will not belong to me. You will not be bound. If you choose to walk away from my land the moment we arrive, you can." Her throat tightened painfully. No one had ever given her a choice. "I understand," she whispered, voice cracking. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or anger, not at her, but at the world that had driven her to expect the opposite. Marcus slammed the hammer down. "Sold!" Ezra stepped up beside her, pulling a knife from his belt with a smooth, controlled motion. The crowd tensed, but he simply cut the rope from her wrists. Ilara exhaled sharply as the rough hemp fell away. Her skin burned with angry red marks. Ezra's jaw tightened when he saw them. He sheathed the knife carefully, as if restraining himself from using it on someone who deserved it far more. "Come," he said quietly. "You're done here." Ilara stared at the outstretched coat he held toward her. Thick, warm, heavy. It smelled like pine and smoke and leather. Nothing like fear, nothing like her father's ranch. She draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her completely. For the first time in years, she didn't feel exposed. She felt hidden, protected. But that feeling lasted only until a voice in the crowd hissed, "Wolf's taking the big one home?" More laughter, hot, sharp, slicing laughter. Elara froze. Ezra didn't. He turned his head just enough that the man who'd spoken shut his mouth instantly. Ezra's eyes were gray steel, beautiful and deadly. No one laughed again. No one dared. He placed a steady hand on Elara's back, not pushing, just guiding her through the crowd. She walked, legs trembling but moving. Each step away from the platform felt like stepping out of a nightmare. But as they reached the end of the square, she dared to ask the question that had been burning holes in her lungs since the moment he spoke her name. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why did you buy me?" Ezra didn't answer immediately. He placed her gently on the bench of his wagon, tightened the coat around her shoulders, and secured the reins. Only then did he speak, and when he did, his voice was so quiet, so rough, she almost missed the ache beneath it. "Because I know what it looks like when a person is about to lose their last piece of themselves," he said, "and because no one there was going to save you." He flicked the reins. The horses started forward. Silver Peak faded behind them. The mountains opened ahead. "Someone had to," Ezra murmured, "and I was there." The town of Silver Peak shrank behind them until it was only a smear of dust against the valley floor. Ahead stretched miles of open range, rolling into foothills the color of burnished gold. Beyond that, jagged peaks cut the sky, Ezra Blackstone's territory. Elara sat on the wagon bench, wrapped in Ezra's thick coat. It dwarfed her, heavy on her shoulders, smelling faintly of pine, wood smoke, and something steadying she couldn't name. The afternoon sun warmed her cheeks, but her hand still trembled in her lap. Ezra didn't speak. He didn't even glance her way. He simply guided the horses with quiet competence, jaw set in unreadable lines. The silence should have frightened her. Instead, it felt safe, safer than she'd felt in years. Only the rhythmic clop of hooves, the creak of the wagon, and the wind brushing through tall grass filled the space between them. After nearly an hour, Elara cleared her throat. "You didn't have to pay that much." Ezra didn't look at her. "I know." "Then why?" "Because I did." His tone was low, firm. "Because it was right." Her breath hitched, unsure how to respond to a man who treated decisions like battlefields, strategic, decisive, and irreversible. But the truth itched beneath her skin. She needed to say it, even if it burned. "I'm not worth $350. Ezra's grip tightened on the reins. The horses sensed it and snorted. He slowed them slightly before speaking. "Is that what your father told you?" The question landed like a stone in her stomach. Elara looked down at her hands. "He didn't need to. The whole town just did." Ezra finally turned his head. His eyes were not warm. They were not soft. They were not gentle. They were furious on her behalf. "Elara?" Hearing her name in his voice startled her. He almost never used it. "You are worth more than every damn fool standing in that square." She swallowed hard. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "Enough to see you stood on that platform with a straight spine even when they tried to break it. Enough to see you didn't beg. Enough to see you didn't curse or spit or collapse." Elara blinked fast. Her throat ached. Ezra looked forward again, shoulders rigid, I've seen men crumble under less. The wagon bumped along the narrowing path. Patches of shade cooled them as they entered the base of the pines. Mountain air replaced the dry valley heat, cleaner, sharper, carrying the scent of needles and distant snow. By late afternoon, clouds began to gather on the ridges. Ezra pulled the horses to a stop in a sheltered hollow near a stream. "We camp here," he said. Ilara climbed down awkwardly, unused to riding wagons. Ezra steadied her with one hand, just a touch on her elbow. He removed it instantly once she found her footing, as if careful not to make her uncomfortable. The gesture made her chest ache. Kindness always did. Kindness was far more dangerous than cruelty. Ezra unloaded a canvas roll, a small iron pot, and 2 tin bowls. He began gathering wood. Ilara hesitated, then knelt beside the stream and filled the pot. When she returned, he had already built a neat pyramid of sticks and coaxed a flame from flint. She watched in silence. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, efficient, precise, without wasted motion. He poured dried beans and a chunk of salt pork into the pot, then set it over the flames. "Soup," he said simply. "It'll take time." Ilara sat across from him, hugging his coat tighter around her. For the first time since the auction, hunger growled in her stomach. Ezra noticed, but didn't comment. The fire crackled between them. Crickets replaced the voice of the town. Darkness softened the harsh lines of Ezra's face. Finally, Ilara whispered, "I thought you were buying me for labor." Ezra didn't shift, didn't blink. "Labor I can hire," he said. "People I can trust, not so easily." She frowned. "Trust? Me?" He shrugged one shoulder. "You didn't lie. You didn't try to bargain. You didn't scream. I respect that." Ilara lowered her gaze. "That's not strength. That's survival." "Same thing," he said. The pot finally began to bubble. Ezra ladled soup into a tin bowl and handed it to her. She reached out cautiously. When their fingers brushed, a spark shot through her like lightning on a dry grass. She pulled her hand back too fast, nearly spilling the bowl. Ezra pretended not to notice. "Eat." The soup was simple but warm, rich with pork fat and smoke. Ilara's throat tightened around the first bite. She hadn't tasted hot food in days. Ezra watched her for a moment, then served himself. They ate quietly. When they finished, he stood and unrolled 2 bedrolls, one close to the fire and one several paces away. "This one is yours," he said, nodding to the one near the flames. "You're giving me the warm spot?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "You were shaking earlier." Her chest tightened, not from fear, not from cold, from the unbearable gentleness in his voice. Ezra lay down facing away from her, one hand resting near the rifle beside him. "Sleep. We ride early." Ilara lay down on her own bedroll, but sleep didn't come. She watched the silhouette of him, broad back, scarred arms, steady breath, and something inside her shifted. Dangerously, quietly. She was no longer terrified of him. She was terrified of trusting him, because in the space of a single day he had done more to protect her than anyone had in her entire life. As the fire dimmed and the mountains whispered in the dark, she thought a question she didn't dare say aloud. What happens to a woman who has never belonged anywhere, when a man like Ezra Blackstone gives her the first place she might? By the time dawn stretched pale gold across the ridgelines, Ezra was already awake, stirring the fire back to life with the end of a branch. Ilara blinked against the soft morning light, pulling his coat tighter around herself as she sat up. He didn't speak at first. He only looked at her, quick, assessing, making sure she'd slept, making sure nothing in the night had frightened her. Then he rose and began packing the wagon with the same quiet efficiency she was starting to recognize as something like care. "Breakfast?" he asked, holding out a tin cup of warm broth. It wasn't food so much as comfort, simple, salty, a reminder that she wasn't waking up alone in a cold barn or being shoved awake for chores. "Thank you," she said softly. Ezra nodded, but his eyes flicked to the red marks on her wrists. The rope, burns, the evidence of what she had endured. He didn't comment. He didn't stare. He simply handed her a salve tin. "Use that. It'll help." Her throat tightened. "I will." By the time the sun cleared the horizon, they were back on the trail, this time moving upward, deeper into the mountains. The air cooled, pine branches whispered overhead, and the world seemed to grow more untouched with every mile they traveled. "Does anyone else live out here?" Elara asked. Ezra shook his head. "Not for 40 miles." Elara swallowed. "So it's just you?" "For 14 years, he said without emotion. She felt that answer like a door closing and another quietly opening. A man who survived that long alone. He didn't bring people into his life lightly. Hours later, the narrow trail widened abruptly, revealing a sweeping valley cupped between mountains. And there, half hidden by tall aspens and sunlit grass, stood Ezra's cabin. Except cabin wasn't the right word. It was enormous. Solid timber walls, stone chimneys, wraparound porch. 3 stories tall, smoke curling gently from one side. A place built by a man who expected to fill it. A man who once had a family. Her breath caught. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Ezra didn't respond, but his shoulders stiffened slightly, as if beauty was something he had forgotten how to acknowledge. He helped her down from the wagon, then guided her toward the front steps. The door opened into a wide, warm room with vaulted ceilings, a massive stone fireplace, and polished wooden beams overhead. The scent of cedar filled the air. Elara froze, overwhelmed. "This is bigger than anything I've ever lived in." "It's just a house," Ezra said. She shook her head. "No, it's a home." Ezra's jaw tightened. For a second, he couldn't look at her. He led her upstairs to a cozy room with a large bed, a window overlooking the valley, handmade quilts folded at the foot. "This will be your room," he said. "You can arrange it however you like." Elara touched the quilt with trembling fingers. "It's for me?" "Who else?" he asked simply. She didn't have an answer for that. When she came downstairs an hour later, clean, hair braided, wearing one of Ezra's late wife's dresses he had left folded for her, she found him in the kitchen slicing potatoes. She paused at the doorway. "I can cook," she said gently, "if you want help." Ezra looked up, surprised, not offended, not dismissive, just unaccustomed to anyone offering. He handed her a knife. "If you're willing." "I am." They prepared the meal side by side, awkwardly at first, then more naturally, as the scents of pepper, onion, and broth filled the cabin. Ezra did everything in silence, but she learned him through it. He wiped the counters after every step. He handled knives like extensions of his hands. He tasted nothing until the end. When they sat down to eat, Elara waited. He frowned. "Why aren't you eating?" She hesitated. "I'm waiting for you." Ezra blinked, a small, stunned reaction that told her more about his past than any story could. He picked up his spoon, and only when he lifted it did she begin to eat. Halfway through the meal, she whispered, "May I ask you something?" Ezra nodded. Why did you put my room upstairs instead of somewhere closer to the kitchen or near the back door, like a servant? Ezra set down his spoon. His voice dropped low, steady. You're not a servant, but I'm working for you. You're earning your wage, he corrected. There's a difference. Her heart twisted. And, he added quietly, you deserve a room with sunlight. She couldn't speak after that. Later, they went outside, Ezra showing her the barn, the stalls, the gleaming herd of horses. When she approached a dapple-gray mare, the horse pressed its muzzle into her palm with easy trust. Ezra watched, surprised. She doesn't let most people touch her. She's gentle, Elara said softly, stroking the mare's neck. Ezra's gaze lingered on her longer than it should have, long enough for her to feel heat rise to her cheeks. Maybe she sees something in you, he said. And what do you see? She asked before she could stop herself. Ezra didn't look away this time. His voice was rough, low. A woman trying to stitch herself back together. Her breath trembled. And doing a damn good job of it. Elara turned quickly toward the mare, blinking hard. He saw too much, more than she was ready for. But that night, after dinner, after dishes, after Ezra had retreated to his study and she'd returned to her room, she sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hand to her chest. For the first time in her life, she wasn't ashamed of its softness, of her size, of her shape, of the space she took up, because today a man made of scars and silence had looked at her like she belonged, not as property, not as burden, as a person. By early November, the mountains wore white crowns again, thin veils of snow gathering along the ridgelines as if winter were pausing there, deciding when to descend. Elara had grown comfortable enough in Ezra's home to know its rhythms. The scrape of his boots when he came in from the barn, the heavy click of his study door at night, the soft whicker of the horses at dawn. But she also sensed something else, a tension that didn't belong to the cold, a weight Ezra carried that wasn't his coat or his gun belt. It began subtly, a slip of paper tucked into the ledger she was dusting, a name she didn't recognize, a date circled twice. But what startled her most was the seal, Silver Peak Territorial Court. She closed the ledger quickly, throat drying. Legal trouble wasn't uncommon for a rancher, but the way Ezra had hidden it, deep inside the drawer he kept locked, meant this was something far greater than a land dispute. That night, after supper, when Ezra excused himself to check the south fences, she watched him go with a lingering sense that he wasn't checking anything at all. He didn't return until after midnight. She heard his boots on the porch, heard him pause, long enough that she imagined him standing in the dark, breath clouding the cold, steadying himself before coming inside. When he did, he didn't see her watching from the shadows of the stairwell. He leaned against the wall just for a second, breathing hard, like a man fighting something too heavy to carry yet too dangerous to set down. The next morning, she tried to speak gently. "You came in late last night?" Ezra didn't look up from his coffee. "Had work." "Ezra," she said softly, "you're lying." He froze. A man like him wasn't used to being confronted, not quietly, not kindly. She continued, barely more than a whisper. "I'm not asking to pry. I'm here. Whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone." Ezra lifted his gaze slowly, eyes gray as the storm clouds gathering over the west ridge. "You don't know what you're offering." "Then show me," she said. For a long moment he said nothing. Then He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded document, and placed it on the table. Elara unfolded it. Her breath caught. Wanted, Marcus Whitfield, for fraud, land theft, and illegal trafficking of persons. The words blurred as her hands began to shake. "My father?" she whispered. Ezra nodded. "The court recently uncovered his dealings, selling workers to mines, using forged deeds to steal land from widows. Your debt to him, fake, created to justify selling you." Elara covered her mouth. "All my life he told me I owed him, that I cost him everything." Ezra's voice darkened. "He lied, and now he's fled the territory. The marshals think he's heading toward the northern passes." "Why would that concern you?" she asked, though a cold certainty was already forming in her chest. Ezra hesitated only a beat. "Because he was seen asking about you." Elara staggered back. "Why? He sold me. He wanted nothing to do with me." Ezra's fists tightened. When men like him lose everything, they go looking for what they think they still own. Her stomach twisted painfully. "But I'm not his property." Ezra stood, towering, fierce. "No, you're not, and he won't touch you." Before she could respond, a sudden knock shook the front door. 3 hard strikes that rattled the hinges. Elara startled. Ezra moved instinctively, stepping in front of her. "Stay behind me," he murmured. She clutched the back of his coat as he opened the door. On the porch stood Sheriff Alden Hayes, dusted with snow, hat low over his eyes. He looked past Ezra toward Elara. "Blackstone," the sheriff said, voice carved from stone. "I'm here with a warning." Ezra didn't move aside. "Say it." "Marcus Whitfield crossed into Silver Peak last night, beat up a peddler, stole a rifle, and was asking everyone where your cabin's located." Elara felt her knees weaken. The sheriff's gaze softened as it landed on her. "I'm sorry, miss, but it seems he's coming for you." Ezra's voice was steady, controlled, lethal. "He'll never reach this cabin." "Blackstone," the sheriff warned, "if Whitfield forces a fight, I'll have to intervene." Ezra didn't blink. "Then you'd better be quick." The sheriff exhaled heavily. "Storm's coming tonight. If Whitfield's out there, he'll use the snow for cover. You two should prepare." He touched his hat and rode off, leaving silence behind him. Ezra closed the door slowly, then turned to Elara. Her eyes were wide, frightened, glistening. "You're safe," he said firmly. "I won't let him near you." Her voice cracked. "Why? Why risk your life for me?" Ezra stepped closer, carefully, as if she were breakable. "Because no one protected my family when they needed saving. I won't let history repeat itself." Elara felt tears spill over. She had spent her whole life being treated as a burden, a problem, something to be shoveled aside. Now, a man carved from mountains and grief stood before her, offering himself as a shield, and she didn't know how to hold the weight of being worth defending, but she wanted to learn. "Ezra," she whispered, voice trembling, "I'm scared." He took her hand, large, calloused, impossibly gentle. "I know, but fear means you have something worth keeping." "And what's that?" His thumb brushed her knuckles. "Your life, your future, and if you'll let me, your place in this home." Her breath caught. He wasn't offering comfort. He was offering belonging. A storm roared to life outside, wind slamming against the walls. Inside the cabin the fire crackled warm and steady. Elara leaned closer, gripping his hand like an anchor. "Ezra, I trust you." His jaw tightened, not with anger, but with something like, "Vow. You'll never regret that," he said. "I swear it." The storm arrived faster than anyone expected. By dusk, the mountains were swallowed by a wall of white, snow driving sideways in thick sheets that rattled the cabin windows like fists demanding to be let in. The wind howled through the pines, bending them like startled animals, fleeing from something worse than weather. Inside, Ezra secured every shutter, every door bolt, every lantern. Ilara followed him room to room, her hands trembling, her pulse beating against her throat like it wanted out. "Will he really come through this?" she whispered. Ezra tested the final bolt, jaw clenched. A man running from the law doesn't fear storms. He uses them. The words chilled her more than the air leaking through the cabin walls. Night fell heavy and fast. Ezra lit the hearth, the flames fighting back the dark, and moved the table toward the center of the room. He placed a rifle within reach, then another beside the window. Ilara hugged her shawl tighter. "I don't want you to get hurt because of me." Ezra turned to her, stepping close enough that she felt the heat of him beneath his coat, the steadiness he carried like a second spine. "Ilara," he said quietly, "if a man like Marcus Whitfield comes here looking for you, he isn't just your problem, he's mine." "Why?" "Because you're under my roof," Ezra said, "and because protecting you is the first thing in 14 years that's felt right." Her breath caught, but before she could reply, a sharp crack split the air outside. A branch? A footstep? Ezra stiffened. That wasn't the wind. He extinguished the lantern nearest the window, plunging half the room into shadow. "Stay behind the hearth," he murmured. "Don't move unless I tell you." Ilara crouched low, heart hammering. Snow slammed the roof in deafening waves, but beneath it, beneath the howl and the roar, there was unmistakably the crunch of boots stepping through deep drifts. Ezra lifted his rifle. Another step. Closer. Then a thud against the porch. A voice, slurred but loud enough to slice through the storm. "Ilara! Girl, I know you're in there." Her blood turned to ice. She covered her mouth to stop the sob from escaping. Ezra stood absolutely still, the way a wolf freezes before striking. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, deadly calm. "Whitfield, turn around and walk away while you still can." A harsh laugh echoed through the storm. "You think you own her, Blackstone? Think a few dollars gives you the right to keep what's mine?" Ilara trembled uncontrollably. Ezra's grip tightened on the rifle. "She was never yours," he said, "and if you come any closer, you won't see another sunrise." Whitfield spat, the sound sharp on the wooden porch. "She's my daughter. I raised her, fed her, clothed her." "You sold her like cattle," Ezra snapped, the words scalding. "You forfeited the right to call yourself her father the moment you tied a rope around her wrists." Silence. Then a violent bang, Marcus slamming his weight against the door. The hinges groaned. Ilara cried out softly. Ezra raised a hand without looking back. "I said stay behind me." Another crash. The door shuddered. Snow blasted through the cracks like smoke. Ezra's voice shifted, lower, colder than she had ever heard. "One more strike, Whitfield. One more. And I end this." Marcus growled through the wood. "You want her so badly? Fine. Let's see you bleed for her." The door exploded inward. A blast of icy wind filled the room, carrying snow, darkness, and the stench of whiskey. Marcus stood framed in the storm, rifle aimed wildly, eyes bloodshot with rage. Before he could fire, Ezra surged forward. The two men crashed into the snow-covered floor, the rifle skidding away. "Ilara, run!" Ezra barked. But she didn't run. She scrambled to the fallen rifle, grabbing it with shaking hands. Ezra and Marcus grappled, two mountains slamming together. Marcus was older, but desperation made him vicious. He landed a blow to Ezra's ribs. Ezra countered, driving Marcus into the hearth's stone edge. "Say goodbye," Marcus hissed, reaching for the knife at his belt. Elara didn't breathe. She stepped forward, lifting the rifle with both hands. "Get away from him!" she cried. Her voice, small but blazing, cut through the chaos. Ezra froze. Marcus turned toward her, and in that heartbeat, Ezra seized Marcus's arm, twisted hard, and slammed him against the ground. The knife clattered away. Marcus went still. Ezra rose, chest heaving. Snow melted off his coat in streams. He turned to Elara. "You saved my life," he said, voice hoarse. "I wasn't going to let him take me," she whispered. "Not again." Ezra stepped closer, cupping her face with hands that still trembled from adrenaline. "I told you," he murmured, "you're not alone up here, not anymore." Outside, the storm raged on. Inside the cabin, something else raged too. Not fear, not danger, but the unmistakable spark of two lives colliding into something neither could escape now. The storm softened by morning, fading from a furious roar to a low, exhausted sigh whispering against the cabin walls. Heavy drifts lay everywhere, piled along the porch, blanketing the valley, smoothing every rough edge of the world into something quiet, untouched, and impossibly still. But inside the cabin, the air was different, not silent, not calm. Something warm flickered beneath the fading tension, something that felt too fragile to name and too powerful to ignore. Ezra finished binding Marcus Whitfield's wrists with rope and dragged him to the far corner of the cabin, away from Elara. Marcus was still unconscious, slumped like a pile of wet canvas. Ezra checked his pulse, steady, unfortunately, but did nothing to rouse him. When he finally stood, he turned to Elara and stopped. She was standing by the hearth, hands trembling, the oversized shawl slipping from her shoulders. Her hair, red, tangled, beautiful, glowed like embers in the morning light. She looked afraid, yes, but not broken. Not anymore. "Elara," he said softly. She looked up, throat tight. "Is it over?" "For now," he answered. "The sheriff will take him as soon as the trail clears." She closed her eyes in relief, but when she opened them again, something else shone there. Uncertainty, vulnerability, hope. "Ezra," she whispered, "last night you could have died because of me." Ezra walked toward her, each step steady and deliberate. When he reached her, he stopped close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, the quiet strength anchoring him to this place, to this moment, to her. "Elara," he said, voice low, rough, and honest. "I would face 10 storms for you. I'd face worse." Her breath caught. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered. "You saved me. You keep saving me. But I don't want to be another burden in your life." Ezra reached out, slow enough that she could pull away if she wished, and brushed his fingertips along her cheek. Her skin heated beneath his touch. "You're not a burden," he said. "You never were." Her voice cracked. "But I'm not," she swallowed. "I'm not like women men usually protect. I'm not thin or graceful or—" Ezra's hand moved to cup her face fully, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "You are exactly the kind of woman I'd protect," he said, "because strength isn't in bone or skin, it's in the heart, and yours is bigger than any I've ever known." Tears filled her eyes. "Why would you say that?" "Because it's true." His voice grew quieter, deeper. "And because last night you stood there with a rifle in your hand, shaking like a leaf, and still chose to fight for my life. No one," his voice faltered, "no one has done that for me since Mary Ann." Elara's breath trembled. She reached up, covering his rough hand with her small, soft one. "I didn't think," she whispered. "Yes, you did," he said. "You thought enough to stand your ground. That's courage." She stepped a little closer, her heart pounding so loudly she wondered if he heard it. "Ezra," she said again, softer now, "what am I to you?" He inhaled sharply, as if she'd asked the one question he'd been avoiding for weeks. Slowly, he took both of her hands in his. His voice came out low, steady, almost reverent. "You're the first person to make this cabin feel alive again. You're the first person I want to see every morning. And the only person I trust to see the parts of me I buried years ago." Elara felt a tear slip down her cheek, warm against the cold morning air. Ezra wiped it away gently with his thumb. "You asked what you are to me," he said. "Your hope, your second chance, your home." Her knees nearly gave out. "Home?" she echoed. Ezra nodded, jaw tight, not with anger, but with emotion he hadn't let himself feel in 14 years. "If you'll have this place," he said quietly, "it's yours. If you'll have me, I'm yours too." Elara couldn't speak. Her throat closed with emotion, her chest aching in a way that felt like healing, not hurt. She didn't rush toward him. She didn't collapse into his arms. She simply stepped forward, one slow step, and rested her forehead against his chest. Ezra exhaled shakily, wrapping his arms around her, pulling her close in a way that promised safety, warmth, and a future neither of them had dared dream of. "You're safe here," he murmured into her hair. "I promise." She clutched his coat, her voice barely a whisper. "And you're safe with me?" He tightened his hold, a low, grateful sound rumbling in his chest. Outside, the storm faded fully. Inside, something far stronger had begun. Stories like this remind us that even in the harshest corners of the world, where storms rage and people are treated like something less than human, a single act of kindness can change the entire course of a life. If you're listening right now, from a quiet kitchen, a crowded bus, a late-night shift, or halfway across the world, tell me where you are. Every comment reminds me that these stories don't just live on mountains or in old frontier towns. They live in you. And if you still believe in love that starts in dark places and grows into something strong, stay close. The next story is already waiting for you. The wind cut through Crimson Hollow like a knife that October afternoon, carrying the sharp bite of early snow and the sour scent of anger. In the middle of the dusty town square, tied to a rough-hewn post like a criminal, stood Helena Lena Ashford. She had always been the fat school teacher to the town, the one with ink on her fingers and chalk dust on her skirts. Today, her blue dress was ripped at the shoulder, her lips split and bleeding, her dark blonde hair hanging loose from its pins. Beneath the bruises, her round face trembled with terror, and yet her brown eyes still begged for someone, anyone, to believe her. Sheriff Clayton Garrett stepped forward, coat flapping in the wind, badge glinting dully on his chest. Beside him loomed Mayor Theodore Hutchinson, waistcoat straining over his belly, and Reverend Josiah Crawford, thin as a rail, fingers wrapped tightly around his Bible. "Helena Ashford," the sheriff called out, his voice carrying to the last row of gawkers. "You stand accused of poisoning 3 pupils in your schoolroom 2 are dead. 1 lies dying. How do you plead?" Lena's bound hands flexed uselessly against the rope. "I am innocent," she cried, voice raw. "I swear it before God. I love those children. I would have died for them, not harmed them." A scream ripped through the crowd. Mrs. Abigail Winters, face ravaged by grief, shoved her way to the front. "They found the rat poison in your satchel," she shouted, pointing a shaking finger. "You fed my boy those biscuits yourself. Murderess!" Lena shook her head until tears flew. "Someone put that bottle there. Please, Mrs. Winters, you know me." Reverend Crawford's voice sliced through hers. "We know enough. A woman who cannot master her own appetite," his gaze swept over Lena's soft figure with open disgust, "is ruled by selfishness. Such a heart can harbor dark impulses." The crowd roared in agreement. "Hang her! Burn the witch! Throw the fat teacher to the wolves!" Mayor Hutchinson lifted his hand, enjoying the hush that followed. "By authority vested in me as mayor of Crimson Hollow, I sentence Helena Ashford to death. She will be bound outside the western gate at sundown and left for the wolves. Let God decide if she is innocent." Lena's knees buckled. Noose, fire, wolves. It all blurred together into one long scream inside her skull. "Please," she whispered, voice nearly gone. "Someone, help me." Before we go on, you listening to this story right now, tell me in the comments, where are you hearing from? Which town? Which country? The sheriff jerked the rope, and the mob surged toward the gate, dragging Lena through a hail of dirt and stones, children chanting "baby killer" as if it were a game. Just beyond the open gate, the prairie yawned wide and empty, the distant line of the Bighorn Mountains already crowned with snow. And there, blocking the road like a slab of living granite, sat a lone rider on a dark bay horse. He was broad-shouldered in a scarred wolf fur coat, beard black and wild, gray eyes cold as steel under the shadow of his hat. A long Winchester rested across his saddle. Men who'd stalked these hills for years knew him at once and went pale. Nathaniel Cross, wolf slayer, the mountain man who'd killed more wolves than any bounty hunter alive. He nudged his horse forward, gaze sweeping the rope, the bruises, the terror on Lena's face. Then his voice rolled over the mob, deep and flat and dangerous. "That's far enough," he said. "You're not feeding this woman to any wolves." The square fell silent the instant Nathaniel Cross spoke. The only sound was the restless stamping of his horse and the distant cry of a hawk circling above the prairie. Sheriff Garrett recovered first. He grabbed the rope binding Lena's wrists and jerked it hard, pulling her half-stumbling behind him. "Step aside, Cross," he ordered. "You don't have authority here." Nathaniel's gray eyes narrowed, unreadable. "Authority," he echoed quietly, "isn't what's being tested." His gaze slid to Lena, her shaking legs, her ragged breath. "What you're about to do is murder." Mayor Hutchinson puffed up, indignation wobbling in his jowls. "The town has spoken. She poisoned children." Nathaniel's voice dropped low. "No, she was framed." A ripple passed through the crowd. Sheriff Garrett barked a hard laugh. "And how would you know that, mountain man? You haven't lived among us in years." "No," Nathaniel said, "but I've been watching for the last 3 days." His hand slipped into his coat. He pulled out a small glass vial, one nearly identical to the bottle found in Lena's satchel. The crowd gasped. "This," he said, holding it up, "I found beneath Timothy Hutchinson's mattress." A few people muttered uncertainly. All eyes swung toward Timothy, standing behind his father, face pale, hands trembling. Nathaniel continued, his tone cold enough to frost iron. "And I spoke to Martha Griggs, the maid. She saw Timothy buy rat poison days before those children took ill." His eyes pinned the mayor's son. "You tried to frame her because she told you no." Timothy's lips cracked open. "Lies," he whispered. "All lies." But the guilt had already seeped across his face like ink in water. Mrs. Winters lunged for him, screaming, and had to be restrained. Sheriff Garrett's jaw flexed. "Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, that doesn't give you the right to interfere." Nathaniel leaned down from his saddle until he was eye level with the sheriff. "You want to drag a woman through the dirt for a crime you didn't bother to investigate. You call it justice." His voice became a low growl. "I call it cowardice." The sheriff's hand twitched toward his gun. Nathaniel didn't blink. "Try it," he said softly, "and you'll be the one meeting your maker today." No one dared move. Nathaniel swung down from his horse in one swift motion. He walked straight to Lena, lifted the rope binding her wrists, and sliced it clean with the knife at his belt. Her hands fell free. She nearly collapsed. He caught her before she hit the ground. "Can you stand?" he murmured. Her voice was barely a breath. I think so." But she couldn't. When she swayed, he scooped her into his arms without a word, lifting her as though she weighed no more than one of his traps. Lena gasped, shocked by how effortlessly he held her. No man had ever carried her before, not since childhood, and never like this. Nathaniel turned to the crowd. "Touch her again," he said evenly, "and you'll answer to me." Mrs. Winters sobbed into her hands. Others backed away. Timothy's eyes darted everywhere but toward his father, and without waiting for permission from anyone, Nathaniel cross-carried Lena to his horse. Wait," Lena whispered as he settled her onto the saddle in front of him. "Where are you taking me?" "Away from here," he said. "Somewhere safe." He mounted behind her, his massive frame bracketing her trembling body. She felt the warmth of him through the wolf fur coat, the steady rise and fall of his breath against her back. His arm circled her waist to steady her, careful, firm, protective. "Hold on," he said quietly. Then he dug his heels in. The horse surged forward, leaving Crimson Hollow shrinking behind them, its shouts lost to the wind, its cruelty swallowed by the rising storm. By nightfall, they reached the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains. The air grew sharper, scented with pine and distant snow. A stream glimmered beneath moonlight, rocks slick and dark. Nathaniel reined in near a sheltered bend beneath a granite overhang. "We'll camp here," he said, helping her down. Her legs buckled again. He steadied her with both hands, and for a moment their eyes met. His cool, guarded, hers wide with exhaustion and disbelief. Lena swallowed. "I don't understand why you saved me." Nathaniel stacked kindling with practiced movements. He didn't answer until the fire crackled to life, painting his scarred face in shifting shades of orange. "Because I've seen a woman die from a lie before," he said finally, voice distant. "I won't watch it happen again." Lena's breath caught. "Someone you loved?" He didn't look at her. "My wife, Catherine." A log shifted in the fire, sparks climbed into the night. Nathaniel sat back on his heels, his shoulders slumped, not from weakness, but from memories heavy enough to crush most men. "It destroyed me once," he said softly. "I won't let it destroy another woman." Lena pulled the blanket he'd given her tighter around her shoulders. She had no words, not yet, but something in her chest cracked open, letting warmth seep through the terror. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt safe. "Thank you," she whispered. Nathaniel nodded once, not trusting his voice. "Sleep," he murmured. "Tomorrow we climb higher." The climb grew steeper on the second day. Tall pines closed around them, their branches heavy with early frost. Lena clung to the saddle horn as Nathaniel guided the horse along narrow switchbacks carved into the mountainside. At times, the drop beside them fell hundreds of feet into a rocky gorge. At others, the path was so tight that branches scraped her sleeves. Nathaniel kept one arm around her waist the whole time. He never spoke unless necessary, but each time she shifted or swayed, his hand tightened just enough to steady her, not controlling, protecting. By late afternoon, the air turned sharp as a blade. Snowflakes drifted down, slow and cold. Nathaniel glanced up at the sky. "Storm's coming sooner than I'd hoped." "Are we far from your cabin?" Lena asked softly. "A few more miles," he said. "We'll make it before dark." He sounded certain, like a man who had survived enough winters to know exactly how far a body could push before breaking. But Lena's body had been pushed enough for one lifetime. Her entire frame ached. The bruises from the townspeople throbbed with each step the horse made. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Nathaniel noticed instantly. "We stop," he said, pulling the reins. "No," Lena whispered. "Please, I don't want to slow you down." "Lena." He dismounted, lifted her down, and set her feet gently on the ground. "You aren't slowing nothing. You're hurt." He crouched to her level. "And you're cold." She opened her mouth to insist she was fine, but her teeth chattered. Nathaniel shrugged out of his wolf fur coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The coat was enormous, far too large, swallowing her whole, but warm. It smelled of pine, smoke, and something she couldn't name, something steady and grounding. "You'll ride with this," Nathaniel said. "I'll walk." "You can't walk in the snow without a coat," Lena protested. His lips twitched, not quite a smile, more like a memory of one. "I grew up in these mountains. I'll manage." But she saw the goose flesh rising on his arms and shook her head. "You saved my life. I won't let you freeze because of me." "Then share it with me," he said simply. Before she could question him, he mounted first, then reached down, strong and unyielding, and pulled her up onto the saddle in front of him. He drew the coat around them both, his broad chest pressed to her back, his arms bracing her in place. The warmth of him seeped through her instantly. It felt like leaning against a living furnace. Lena's breath hitched, not from fear this time, but from something softer, something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Better?" he asked, his voice low near her ear. She nodded. "Better." They rode the remaining miles that way, and for the first time since her nightmare began, Lena felt something inside her settle, like a frightened animal curling into a safe den. It was nearly dark when the trees parted and the cabin finally appeared. It stood on a natural rise overlooking a valley blanketed in white. Solid timber walls, smoke curling from a stone chimney, a small barn tucked beside it, and a stack of firewood neatly chopped and covered by a tarp. Nathaniel helped her down, gently. "Welcome home," he said. "Home?" she echoed uncertainly. "For now," he corrected, meeting her eyes. "Until you decide otherwise." The word struck her not because of what he said, but because of how softly he said it, as though her choice mattered, as though she wasn't just a burden, a nuisance, a joke, the way so many had treated her in Crimson Hollow. Inside the cabin, warmth wrapped around them instantly. A fire crackled in the hearth. A thick bearskin rug lay across the floor. The air smelled faintly of pine resin and venison stew simmering in a cast-iron pot. It didn't feel like the home of a dangerous recluse. It felt cared for. "You can sit," Nathaniel said, pulling out a sturdy wooden chair. "I'll fix you a warm drink." She trembled with exhaustion as she lowered herself into the chair. Her fingers tingled painfully as they thawed. Nathaniel poured hot water into a tin cup, added herbs, and handed it to her. "Drink slow," he instructed. She did. The heat slid through her chest like a balm. When she set the cup down, she found Nathaniel watching her. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" she asked quietly. "Like what?" "Like I'm someone worth saving." Nathaniel's expression tightened, his jaw flexed. "Because you are." She opened her mouth to argue, but he held up a hand. "You were ready to die today," he said. "I saw it in your eyes. You'd already accepted their lies as truth." Lena blinked. No one had seen her, not really seen her, in years. Not even she had seen herself as anything but a burden. "I didn't save Catherine," Nathaniel continued, "but I can save you, and I'll do it as long as you stay in these mountains." "And if I leave?" Her voice trembled. "You won't leave while you're still afraid," he said. "When you walk down that mountain someday, it'll be because you choose to. Strong, safe, and with your head held high." Something warm unfurled beneath her ribs. "And you?" she whispered. "Will you walk down with me?" His eyes softened, barely, but enough. "If you want me to." Her breath caught. She didn't know what to say, what to feel. She only knew that for the first time in her life, she wasn't shaking from fear. She was shaking because this man, this mountain man with shadows in his eyes, looked at her like she was worth defending, worth protecting, worth something. Outside, the wind howled. The storm descended over the mountains, cloaking the world in snow and darkness. But inside the cabin, light flickered warm against the walls, and Lena felt, for the first time since childhood, that she might survive the winter after all. Storm clouds pressed low over the mountains for the next 3 days, burying the world in white. Wind rattled the shutters like fists begging to get inside. Snow piled high against the door, sealing the cabin in a cocoon of cold and silence. Inside, the fire burned steadily. It had to. Nathaniel kept it alive through every hour of the night. He split wood until his shoulders gleamed with sweat despite the freezing air, then stacked it near the hearth where Lena could reach it. Every flame, every log, every breath of warmth felt like his vow. "She will not freeze, not under my roof." On the first evening, Lena tried to help prepare supper. Her hand shook, still bruised from being dragged through the dirt. When she tried to lift the heavy iron pot, she winced and almost dropped it. Nathaniel crossed the room in 3 strides, steadying it with one hand. "You're hurt," he said quietly. "It's nothing," she whispered, embarrassed. He tilted his head, eyes tracing the discoloration around her wrists. "That's not nothing." For a long moment he simply stood there, large, steady, patient, waiting for her to let go. And slowly she did. Her fingers unclenched from the pot handle. He took it from her gently, as though she were made of something fragile, something precious. "You sit," he said softly. "You've carried enough weight for one lifetime." Lena sat, not because she wanted to be waited on, but because something inside her finally surrendered. For the first time, someone wasn't telling her she was taking up too much space. For the first time, someone was clearing space for her. As the storm roared outside, they fell into a rhythm. Mornings began with the smell of hot herbs. Nathaniel always left a steaming tin cup at her bedside before stepping out to check the traps. By the time Lena pulled on her wool socks and padded into the main room, he would be brushing snow off his shoulders, stamping his boots by the door. "You slept?" he asked each morning. "Better," she always answered. He never pressed more than that, though she knew he heard her tossing in the night, haunted by the sound of children screaming, by the memory of stones hitting her cheeks. Afternoons passed with small tasks. Lena insisted on helping despite her injuries. She swept the floors, mended torn shirts, organized the shelves. Nathaniel, seeing her determination, built her a low wooden step so she could reach the higher cupboard safely. "You watch me too closely," she teased one day. His lips tugged slightly, not quite a smile, but the closest thing she'd seen on his stern face. "That's because you fall too easily." "You think I'm clumsy?" she gasped, hand to her chest. "I think someone who was beaten and dragged through the dirt shouldn't climb furniture," Nathaniel replied. She froze. She had expected mockery, but his voice held only concern, gentle, steady, without pity. Something warm unfurled in her chest. Later that day, while she dusted the bookshelf, she found a small stack of worn primers, child-sized, pages bent, letters traced again and again by shaky hands. She touched the top one with trembling fingers. "These belong to Emma?" Nathaniel stiffened. He was carving wood by the window, knife paused mid-air. "Yes," he said. Lena hesitated. "If it hurts you for me to see them, I'll put them away." Nathaniel lowered the knife. His breath fogged the glass beside him. "No," he said quietly. "You can look. I don't mind." He did mind. His voice said so, but he was trying. For her. She opened the primer carefully. She had neat handwriting. "She tried hard," he murmured, "like her mother." Lena closed the book gently, heart aching for a child she'd never met. "You love them fiercely," she whispered. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. "More than my own life." She looked at him then, not like the wolf slayer the world feared, but like a man filled with grief so deep it had become bone. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said. He nodded once, sharply, as though accepting the words cost him effort. She didn't push further. Instead, she returned the books to the shelf and left a sprig of pine on top, a small offering of respect. Nathaniel noticed. He didn't say a word, but that night, when she walked into the main room, there was a fresh wool blanket folded over her chair. By the second night, the storm worsened. Wind screamed against the logs. Lena sat by the hearth, sewing a button onto one of Nathaniel's shirts. He paced the room, restless, as if the storm pressed against him from the inside. "What's wrong?" she asked. "You're trembling." She looked down. Her hands were shaking, thread slipping from her fingers. "It's just the storm. I've always been afraid of thunder." Then quieter. "And of being alone." Nathaniel stopped pacing. He came to her chair and knelt beside it, this giant of a man kneeling before her like she was something that mattered. "You're not alone here," he said. His words were simple, quiet, but they dropped into her like a stone into still water, sending ripples through every memory of being abandoned, mocked, unwanted. Lena lowered her head and whispered, "Why are you so kind to me?" Nathaniel didn't answer immediately. The firelight flickered across his face, softening the scars. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost afraid. "Because kindness was denied to you, and I know what that does to a person." Her throat tightened. "Nathaniel." He shook his head, stood up too quickly, like a man afraid he'd said too much. "I'll check the door," he muttered and strode away. But Lena watched him closely now. She saw how his shoulders trembled, not from cold, but from feeling. Nathaniel Cross, the wolf slayer, the man who stood between her and death, was more afraid of grief than any predator on these mountains. On the third morning of the storm, Lena woke to find the fire blazing high and breakfast already simmering on the stove. Nathaniel stood at the table, carving something from a block of wood. She approached quietly. "What are you making?" He froze, caught. Then he turned the carving so she could see. It wasn't finished yet, but she recognized the shape immediately. A small wooden book. Her book, the one she always kept in her school satchel. A carved replica of the one the mob had torn apart when dragging her through the street. Her breath hitched. You're making this for me?" Nathaniel looked away, pretending to examine the carving. "I figured you'd want something to remind you what you are, a teacher." Lena pressed a hand to her mouth. No one had given her a gift since she was a child. No one had thought about what she needed. No one had noticed what she loved, except him. "Thank you," she whispered. Nathaniel nodded once, as though afraid more words might undo him. But Lena stepped closer, heart pounding. "Nathaniel?" He looked at her. She touched his hand, lightly, shyly. And for the first time since she'd been dragged from Crimson Hollow, she felt safe enough to breathe. Outside, snow buried the world. Inside, warmth gathered in small, careful moments. And something new, quiet but unmistakable, began to grow between them. The storm broke on the fourth morning, leaving the world carved in white marble. Snow draped itself over pine branches like heavy linens. The air was so still that every breath felt loud. Lena stepped outside with Nathaniel's coat wrapped around her shoulders, the cold biting her cheeks as she drew in the clean mountain air. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Nathaniel watched her from the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "It's dangerous," he corrected softly. "Storms leave the mountains hungry." She didn't know whether he meant the wolves, the men who lived by violence, or the ghosts of memory that prowled his eyes. Inside the cabin, they ate breakfast in silence, comfortable silence, until Nathaniel suddenly asked, "Lena, can I ask you something?" Lena looked up, startled. "Of course." He hesitated, a rare sight in a man who'd faced down mobs and wolves alike. "When they dragged you to that post, why didn't you fight harder to convince them?" She set her spoon down. Her throat tightened. "Because, Nathaniel, nobody listens to women like me." She forced a small smile. "And when they look at me, they don't see a teacher. They see what they want to see." Nathaniel's jaw clenched. "They see wrong." Lena looked away, heart racing, but the peace of the morning didn't last long. Just before noon, Nathaniel went into the woods to check his traps. Lena busied herself folding laundry near the fire. She had nearly finished when she heard hoofbeats, distant at first, then growing closer. Not thunder, not snow falling. Horses, multiple horses. A tremor of fear shot through her. She hurried to the window and froze. 5 figures approached the cabin's clearing, their coats flapping in the wind. One held a rifle across his saddle. Another wore a sheriff's badge that glinted in the winter sun. Sheriff Clayton Garrett. Her heart dropped into her stomach. She backed away from the window, but it was too late. The men dismounted. Snow crunched under their boots. A fist hammered the door. "Cross! Open up! We have business here!" Lena's pulse hammered. Nathaniel was somewhere in the woods, too far to hear. Another thunderous knock. "Open the door or we break it!" Lena swallowed hard. She wasn't helpless. Nathaniel had taught her how to handle a pistol, but facing 5 armed men? She felt the world closing in. The door burst open. Sheriff Garrett stepped inside, brushing snow from his coat, his eyes cold and triumphant when they landed on her. "Well, well," he sneered, "hiding out here like a guilty rat?" Lena tried to stand tall. "I'm innocent. Everyone knows now," Timothy confessed. Garrett walked closer, boots thudding on the wooden floor. "Confessed under pressure, and he's rich. Rich men buy their way out of trouble. But you," he jabbed a finger at her chest, "you're poor and fat and easy to blame." Lena's breath caught. He said it like a man crushing a bug. Before she could reply, another knock sounded at the door. 3 fast pounds. Every man in the room turned. A deep, cold voice rumbled from outside. "Step away from her!" "Nathaniel," Garrett smirked. "Ah, Wolfslayer returns." Nathaniel stepped inside. Snow scattered across his shoulders, both guns drawn. His eyes burned like steel caught in firelight. "Touch her," he growled, "and I'll put you in the ground next to your lies." The deputies reached for their guns. Nathaniel cocked both Colts in the same heartbeat. "Don't." Garrett raised a hand to halt his men, but didn't step back. "She's not safe here, Cross. I'm here to escort her back to Crimson Hollow for retrial." "No," Nathaniel said. "She was cleared." Garrett grinned. "Town council decided to re-examine the case. Public outrage and all. People want blood, and she's the easiest target." Then he added, voice dripping venom, "Besides, how do we know Cross didn't help poison those kids? The man lives with wolves, acts like one." Nathaniel stepped forward. The room seemed to shrink around him. "You came for her, Sheriff, not because she's guilty, because you need someone to blame, and because cowards only fight people who can't fight back." Garrett's eye twitched. "Stand down, Cross." "No." The deputies tensed. Nathaniel lifted his guns. Steady, calm, deadly. Garrett hesitated. This wasn't a man who bluffed. "This is your last warning," Nathaniel said. "Leave." For a moment, one razor-sharp moment, it wasn't clear what Garrett would choose. But the deputies glanced between Nathaniel's unflinching stare and the narrow cabin that gave them no escape routes. Garrett spat on the floor. "This isn't over." He motioned to his men, "Mount up." They stomped out, slamming the door behind them. The hoofbeats faded into the forest. Only then did Lena exhale. Nathaniel holstered his guns and turned to her. "Are you hurt?" "No," she whispered, "but they'll be back." "I know. And they'll come with more men." "I know. So what do we do?" Nathaniel stepped closer, slow, deliberate. He cupped her face gently, his rough thumb brushing a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "We survive," he said. "Together." Her breath caught. He wasn't pledging to protect her like she was a burden. He was pledging to stand with her. The realization broke something inside her and healed something else at the same time. That night, they boarded the windows, stacked extra firewood, and prepared for whatever was coming. Nathaniel taught her how to reload quickly, where to stand if the door broke, how to move without making a target of herself. But when the chores were done, Lena stood at the window and watched snowflakes drift through the moonlight. "They won't stop," she murmured, voice trembling. "Not until they ruin me." Nathaniel came to stand behind her, his warmth steady at her back. "They won't ruin you," he said quietly, "because I won't let them." She turned. The fire-lit cabin cast soft shadows on his face, outlining the angles of his jaw, the scars on his cheek, the worn strength of him. "I believe you," she whispered. He looked almost startled. "Why?" Lena took a breath. Her heart pounded like wings trapped in a cage. "Because no one has ever stood up for me before, not ever. And you walked out in front of the whole town. You risked everything. For me?" Nathaniel swallowed hard, as if her words struck at something deep. "Lena," he said softly, "you were worth standing up for." Her breath trembled. She reached up and touched his cheek, fingertips brushing the scar along his jaw. Nathaniel didn't move, didn't breathe. Then slowly, like a man approaching fire he was certain would burn him, he leaned into her touch. Lena stepped closer until their foreheads touched. Nathaniel whispered, "I won't let them take you." And for the first time since the mob dragged her across the dirt, Lena felt something stronger than fear, hope. The attack came at dawn. A pale winter sun struggled to rise, casting thin gold threads across the frost-covered clearing. Inside the cabin, Lena stirred awake on the pallet near the fire. Nathaniel had insisted she sleep closest to the warmth. He hadn't slept at all. He sat against the wall, rifle across his knees, eyes alert. When the first crunch of snow echoed outside, he was on his feet in an instant. "Lena," he whispered, "stay low." She nodded, her heart already pounding. Then came the voices: Sheriff Garrett, Timothy Hutchinson, and at least 8 more men. "Nathaniel Cross!" Garrett shouted from outside. "This is your final warning. Hand over the girl, or we'll burn that shack down with both of you inside." Nathaniel moved to the window, quietly sliding the barrel of his Winchester between the planks. Lena crawled behind the table, clutching the pistol he'd given her. Garrett kept shouting, "She'll face justice whether you like it or not. Now send her out." Nathaniel didn't shout back. He didn't posture or threaten. He whispered, "Over my dead body." The gunfire exploded first from the tree line. Bullets slammed into the cabin walls, sending splinters flying. Lena ducked and covered her ears. Nathaniel fired only once, the sharp crack echoing across the clearing. A scream confirmed he'd hit his target. Snow kicked up as the attackers scattered. Timothy yelled, "Burn them out! Get close! Push to the door!" Nathaniel moved like a man carved from instinct. He grabbed a second rifle from the mantel and tossed it to Lena. "Stay behind the table. Aim for shapes, not faces. Make yourself small." "But I trust you," he said simply. And she did something she'd never done in her life. She believed him. The next wave came from the west side. 3 men rushed through the trees, trying to flank the cabin. Nathaniel dropped the first with a clean shot. Lena, hand shaking but steadying with each heartbeat, fired at the second. The bullet hit the log near his shoulder, close enough to make him dive for cover and retreat. "Good," Nathaniel called out. "You're doing fine." But Timothy Hutchinson was not retreating. He ran close, too close, and hurled something toward the cabin. A torch. Nathaniel's eyes widened. "Lena, move!" The torch struck the outside wall, flames licking upward. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. He dashed out the door, rolling through the snow as bullets whistled around him. He hit the burning wall with a heavy blanket he'd grabbed, smothering the flames. Garrett screamed, "Take him down!" Lena saw movement from the window, two men breaking from the pines, rifles lifted. "No!" she cried, raising her pistol. The first shot missed. The second grazed one attacker's shoulder. He spun, startled. That pause saved Nathaniel's life. He fired twice, dropping both men before rolling behind a boulder for cover. Garrett cursed. "You fools! He's killing all of you! Surround the cabin!" The gunfire slowed for a moment, men repositioning, strategizing. Inside the cabin, smoke drifted from the wall. Lena coughed, wiping her eyes. "Nathaniel, they'll kill you." "No," he said, slipping back inside through the rear door he'd built years ago. "Not today." He grabbed her shoulders. "Listen to me. If they breach the door, you run through the back and straight into the ravine. Follow the creek. Don't stop. Don't look back." "I'm not leaving you." "You will if I tell you to." His voice cracked, the first break she'd ever heard. Before she could protest, Timothy Hutchinson's voice shrieked from outside, "I'll kill her myself." Then, impossibly, he rushed the cabin alone. Madness and cowardice twisting his face. He kicked the door open. Lena screamed. Nathaniel was faster. He tackled Timothy before the young man's pistol fully cleared his holster. They crashed to the floor, slamming into the table. Timothy clawed and kicked like a trapped animal. "You ruined my life," Timothy spat, swinging wildly. "She made me a joke." "She's the only innocent person in this whole rotten town," Nathaniel roared. Timothy reached for a knife at his boot. Lena saw the blade flash. Without thinking, without hesitation, she lifted the pistol with both hands and fired. The blast echoed through the cabin. Timothy collapsed, the knife clattering from his grip. Lena froze, trembling violently. Nathaniel crawled to her, cupping her face with both hands. "It's over," he whispered. "You saved us." But it wasn't over, because outside Sheriff Garrett shouted, fall back now." The crunch of hurried boots filled the air as the remaining men ran, not in defeat, in fear. Wolves began to howl in the distance, low, rising, hungry, a whole pack. Drawn by the smell of blood, by the chaos, by the winter hunger Nathaniel had warned her about. Lena swallowed hard. "Nathaniel, they're coming." He nodded, eyes fierce in the dim cabin light. "Then we protect each other," he said, "whatever happens next." The howls thickened the air, rising from every direction like a chorus pulled straight from the underworld. Lena stiffened beside Nathaniel, clutching the empty pistol with trembling fingers. Outside, the remaining riders scrambled onto their horses, shouting in panic as the dark shapes moved through the trees. Nathaniel peered through a crack in the boarded window. "They're circling," he said. "The pack knows those men are wounded and afraid." "What about us?" Lena whispered. Nathaniel turned, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek with a touch she'd begun to crave. "They're not after us," he said softly. "Wolves don't go near cabins unless forced, and they know my scent." She swallowed hard. "What do we do?" "Stay inside, stay quiet, and pray the men outside have enough sense to ride hard and far." They didn't. Outside, Sheriff Garrett's voice broke with terror. "Ride, ride, damn it!" But the wolves were faster. Lena watched, horrified, as dark bodies streaked across the clearing. Horses reared, men screamed, gunshots cracked uselessly through the morning air. Nathaniel rested a steadying hand on her back. "Don't look," he murmured. But Lena needed to see, needed to understand the world Nathaniel survived in every day, needed to understand the man he had become. Within minutes, the clearing fell silent, except for the crunching of snow beneath retreating paws. The wolves vanished as quickly as they had come, shadows swallowed by trees. Nature had passed judgment more swiftly than any courtroom ever could. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. "It's done." Lena turned to him. Are we safe now?" "For today," he said. "Maybe longer. Sometimes fear does what justice fails to do." She nodded, though her hand still shook. Nathaniel stepped closer, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "You were brave," he said quietly. "Braver than anyone in Crimson Hollow ever gave you credit for." Tears welled in her eyes. "Nathaniel, I didn't want to kill him, but he was going to hurt you." "I know." He reached for her hands, rough palms enveloping her trembling fingers. "Lena, you saved my life, and I haven't had one worth saving in a long time." She let out a soft, broken laugh. "I think you have more worth than you believe." The cabin was dim, firelight flickering against the walls, painting warmth where the world outside lay rimmed in ice and blood. Nathaniel looked down at her, something tender and unguarded shining through his scarred features. "You're safe here," he whispered, "if you want to be." Her breath caught. "I want to be." No grand declarations, no promises carved in thunder, just two people standing close in a fragile silence that felt almost sacred. Nathaniel brushed his forehead against hers, and she closed her eyes. Home, she thought. For the first time in years, the word felt possible. He wrapped an arm around her waist, drawing her into him. "This cabin," he said softly, "these mountains, they're yours if you'll have them. I'm yours if you'll have me." Her voice trembled. "Nathaniel, I do." Outside, the snow fell in soft, forgiving sheets, covering the scars of the morning. Inside, a fire crackled, warm and steady, like the quiet, growing love between them. A love strong enough to face the world beyond the mountains, if the world ever dared come again. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the cruelest storms don't fall from the sky. They come from the people we live beside. And yet, even in a world ready to cast stones, there are souls like Nathaniel Cross, who stand unshaken when everyone else turns away. Lena found safety not because she was perfect, but because someone finally saw her worth. If you're listening right now, tell me, where in the world are you hearing this story from? Which city? Which country? Your comments keep these frontier tales alive. And if you still believe in love that protects the forgotten, stay close. The next story is coming soon.